Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back on this beautiful, coldish kind of morning, right? It's my favorite kind of weather, so I'm excited. Alrighty, so today we are going over the last topic of the first series of our meditation course or class, which is visualization meditation. So visualization, just like every other method we've gone over, is a form of concentration or to focus on meditation object. So we'll discuss briefly that today and go over some examples and some challenges we may have over that. And then the next two classes next month will be pretty much an open discussion where we will review pretty much everything else that we've covered throughout the past few months and then just kind of have an open discussion and Q&A. So the next two classes will be our last two classes until April. April we'll have our half-day retreat, and then we will start up again bright and shiny in May. And it'll continue being the second and fourth Saturday of the month. Alrighty, so visualization. I left it at the end of our methods and topics because it is technically the most difficult for the most part, for most people, I'm sure. It has many different aspects and types of doing visualization, right? So there's two main methods. One is a still image visualization, where you're just visualizing or imagining a single item, right? It could be a statue or an image, appearance, anything that's just still in your mind. The second method is to visualize something that's moving. So it could be water flowing or a flower growing or, just something that is concentrated and still and not entertaining, right? You don't want to daydream about something. You don't want to imagine something that's unreal, right? We just want to find something that is happening already. So it could be the sun setting and rising, or a flower growing, or the trees changing, right? Stuff like that. Something natural would be the best. So the first example I have on our notes here is from one of the very popular sutras or texts of the Pure Land Buddhism tradition. So it's coming from the visualization of Amitabha's Pure Land Sutra. The sutra itself describes 16 very detailed visualization practices. These visualization practices help you just imagine a pure land in our own life, right? We are obviously surrounded by chaos and ugliness and just a mess. So these visualizations and meditation in general helps you see past that and see that there is beauty in our world, regardless of the ugly things we may see. So I put in the very first visualization that's in the sutra. So I also mentioned in here, I gave you guys the full name of the text, so that way if you want to Google it or look it up later on, you can see all 16 practices. But I only included the very first visualization. So I'll read it out loud here for you, and I believe it's on the second page. This one in quotes. So I'll read it here for you. So the first visualization is, the Buddha said to Vedi that you and all sentient beings should single-mindedly concentrate your thoughts with one pointed attention on the western quarter. How is this to be done? All the multitudes of sentient beings who are not born blind and have the sense of sight have seen the setting sun. Focusing your attention and sitting in the proper posture, you should face the west, contemplatively examine the sun, with your mind firmly fixed upon it. Firmly concentrate upon the setting sun and do not let your sight wander from it. It should appear like a red drum suspended above the horizon. Once the sun is visualized in this way, then whether the eyes are shut or open, it can be clearly seen. This is the image of the sun and is called the first visualization. And right below that, I did include the full text, the name of the text for you. So if you do want to look it up later and read through the text itself is not very long. So it'd be easy to at least go over the 16 visualizations. So in the past, I've used one visualization a day. That way, after 16 days, on the 17th day, you can pretty much visualize the whole scene. But as I mentioned earlier, some of the other practices is, so what we do today, or I'll ask to do today, you can either visualize this first visualization that we just read, or you can visualize either a flower sprouting, or the trees changing color throughout the seasons, right? So something that you know, and you know how it looks, you know how it feels, you know how it moves. These would be things easier for you to visualize versus something that's completely new or something that's completely foreign to you. So if the first visualization doesn't work out, or you can't really imagine yourself seeing it in your mind, do feel free to focus on something else that you are pretty familiar with, and it'll be much easier for you. The last example I gave here is not so much visualization, but I call it generosity meditation. We've done this. When did we do this? I think we've done this. I taught this during one of our Sunday services in the past. So generosity meditation is basically visualizing yourself giving up your items or giving up your prized possessions, right? It kind of goes hand in hand with the metta meditation that we talked about a few weeks ago, right? So metta meditation is meditating on the well-being of yourself and others. So visualization is kind of a part B to that practice in a way. So if you are having a hard time visualizing, whether it's the setting of the sun or the trees or the flower, whatever you intend to focus on, if that's too difficult for you, or if you find yourself being too distracted or not able to focus on the image for very long, you can switch over to this generosity meditation. Basically what it is, and how I've described it here in our notes, is you can see yourself in different ways. But I mentioned, or I put the example that you can imagine or visualize yourself in your home, right? So you can imagine and visualize yourself opening your front door and just seeing people come to you. So whether it's people you dislike, or if it's just neighbors, or it's strangers, just visualize these people come up to you and visualize yourself giving some of your items to them, right? So if you find it's best to give something that's important to you, right? So whether it's jewelry or just something that's meaningful to you, right? Imagine yourself giving that to those people. And then once you shut the door, there's another knock on the door, and you just kind of continue the process until you've kind of gone through all your prized possessions or your most intimate objects you want to give away, right? So the point of this is to help give you the feeling that generosity is not difficult, right? There's a lot of examples where we see people who are fairly well off or wealthy, and it's very hard for them just to give $5 to a homeless person or something, right? Like it's as if they're giving a limb or a kidney or something, right? It's just so difficult to give. So this practice helps us get over that hump, right? It helps remind ourselves that our possessions are not the things that make us us. They are not that important to us, right? We can live without them. We may feel or think that we can't sometimes, but obviously we can. So when you visualize yourself giving your items away, it helps you detach from those possessions. It helps you realize that if I had lost them, or if they were stolen or broken or whatever, that it's not the end of the world, that you can survive if you don't have your brand new car or iPhone or whatever it is, right? That way, when you're out and about after you practice this for a while, it'll be easier for you to give. It'll be easier for you to let someone use something that's important to you that you may have not let them use in the past. It may be easier for you to donate or give away things that you think you still need, but you really don't need, right? I'm sure we all hoard things at home that we keep just for the sake of keeping, and we're just kind of scared to give it away, right? Because we're like, oh, I may need this in the future, or it may come into usefulness at one point. But 10, 20 years down the road, you're like, you know what? I really didn't need that shoebox. So, because I hoard boxes, empty boxes. I don't know why. I just keep every single box I get. It's just so weird. So now I have a whole clutter of boxes that I use eventually, but I just don't get rid of. But anyway, so for me, it'll be boxes, right? Because I don't have anything else, obviously. So for you, it could be whatever else you have in your home. So this is really great because it also not only allows us to detach from those items and have the willingness to give more, but also helps us that when we are giving, it hopefully shouldn't make you feel any sort of regrets, right? Because sometimes when we give either a large sum of money or a big item or just something that is important or expensive, we may have the slight regret that we gave it away or we let them use it, right? Because we're afraid if we have the intention of getting it back, we're afraid that it may be broken or something's missing or whatever it is, right? So doing this would help you release that tension of holding on to it. And it'll just be easier to let it go. And if it comes back, hopefully in one piece, you're okay. If it doesn't, hopefully you'll still be okay, but it'll get that resentment, that regret out of your mind. Hopefully. Leon, do you want to pass these notes to the gentleman behind you? So visualization sounds pretty simple for the most part. It's easier when you're doing one of the moving visualizations, right? So if you are visualizing either the sprouting of the flower or the trees or the giving away of product items, then those are easier ones to do because it's a constant movement, right? It's something our mind already does habitually. The more difficult part is visualizing a still item or still object. A lot of Buddhist practices, we visualize the image or a statue of a Buddha or the Bodhisattva. And we do that so we can concentrate on their qualities, we concentrate on their characteristics so that we can absorb those qualities and characteristics within ourselves and try to emulate their greatness and their compassion, right? So it's a little bit more difficult because our mind can only focus on something probably for a few seconds before it kind of disappears or wanders off, right? So the still image visualization is a little bit more difficult, but it is very important nonetheless, because it is, like all other methods that we've covered, it is still a method of concentration and to keep our focus. So you can either try one and move on to the other, or kind of go back and forth just to see what may work for you best. I typically try to do half and half. So I'll start out with the moving object because it's easier. It'll help calm my mind and help my body get settled, and then it'll focus on a still image. So you can try doing that, or vice versa, or a combination of the both, whatever works for you. But the point is that you want to set the intention of what you're visualizing first in your mind. So if you are going to do a flower, or you are doing the trees, you have to reiterate to your mind, that's what I'm going to focus on. So that way when you're focusing on it, and if you lose track or you lose concentration or you get distracted, then you have to remind yourself, you have to be mindful that you need to go back to that object. Because what tends to happen is if you are doing a moving visualization, that you're so carried away, you're so caught up in the movement and what you're visualizing that you totally forget what your whole intention was in the first place, right? So if you are visualizing that you're giving away items, the next thing you know, you're having a party in the back of the yard and you're barbecuing, right? And that defeats the whole purpose of what you're trying to do. So try to always bring yourself back if you tend to get distracted. But if you do get distracted, don't be discouraged. As I always say that if you do realize that you're being distracted or you lost concentration, that mental note or that mental or that mindfulness of you saying, oh, I lost distraction, is a good thing, right? Because you are being mindful that you've gotten distracted or your mind has wandered. So that in itself is an achievement, because you've stopped yourself from going about, and you've stopped yourself from having that barbecue in the backyard. Excuse me. So don't be discouraged if you lose your concentration. It does take practice, obviously, like everything else. And as I always say, meditation is a discipline. It's not a hobby. So if you are intending to use it for its true benefits, then you do have to practice it consistently and diligently. And I always say that you can always start out with 5, 10, 15 minutes and try to work your way up. Try to have a set schedule for your meditation practice every day. It helps your mind and your body know that this is time for meditation, this is time for mindfulness, this is time for concentration. And if you do it repeatedly, if you do it consistently, for so long, then if you go on, if the day comes where you haven't meditated on your set schedule, you already know that something's missing and you need to do it, hopefully. But the true benefits of meditation does come with practice and self-discipline. So I will just keep at those items that we've covered so far. Yeah, I can go over more examples, but we'll just stick to the 3. I think it'll be good for you for now. We can always go over more in future classes or future topics. For now, before we sit for our meditation, do we have any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts?
I just say if I get up because my back's hurting.
Oh,
that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. You do you.
Okay.
You do you. Okay. So we will sit for 30 minutes since we have time this time. If you are on the ground, just remember your 7 postures of your legs, back, shoulders, neck, head, mouth, and hands. If you're on the chair, you still want to sit up straight, feet flat on the ground, hands either in your palms or on your knees. Just remind yourself, if you are on your knees, do not hold yourself up. You just want to simply let it sit. And then I'll ring the bell to start. We'll do 30 minutes. And then afterward, when we're done, we can go over some shared experiences, hopefully. How was everyone's visualization today? Good, bad, mediocre?
It's better.
Hmm?
It's better as you concentrate.
It does.
Has everybody ever heard the term monkey mind? Monkey mind? Yeah. That's your challenge when you first sit. But what's interesting to me is that if you sit long enough, you actually start experiencing the monkey mind settling down.
Yep. It knows. Hey, I mean serious business. You're giving it bananas to chill out. Like you give kids books to chill out. Any questions from what you may have experienced or not experienced?
Do you have any recommendation? Like, what's easier for you personally? If it's like an image that you know of, or is it an image that you just imagine, or do you recall on the memory?
Probably a little bit of everything. Years and years and years ago, I used to meditate on a candle, a lit candle. So you would visualize and see the flames flicker and move around. I would stare at it for like 10 minutes. And then I would close my eyes and visualize what I just stared at for 10 minutes. Trying to visualize the shape of the candle, the way it flickers, how it flickers, seeing little sparks every once in a while, right? And if you're able to hold on to that for a while, then I would visualize pretty much the wax just going down and down and down until the wax was complete. I don't recommend visualizing on imagined or made up stuff, just because that's just an illusion. It's fake, right? That's the whole Buddhist practice, is to avoid delusion and illusion and fakeness. So that's why I always recommend doing something that you know, or in nature. So whether it's the flower, the trees, the river, the sun, something that's actually there and something that actually moves and changes. And it's better to do that. Personally, I meditate on an image of the Buddha, right? So we stare at the Buddha every day, right, for our prayers and stuff. So I have a pretty good feeling of what it looks like, right? But for me, when I'm doing, depending on what I'm doing, right, there's different methods, obviously. But if I am doing on the image of the Buddha, then I'm visualizing, depending on if I'm visualizing a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, then I'm also mentally, as I breathe, recite their name, right? So today, for instance, I was visualizing an Amitabha Buddha. So as I'm breathing, I'm breathing each syllable. So in Amitabha, Amitabha. Kind of what we did last time with the chanting meditation. So that helps me focus. You don't have to mentally say or do anything other than just visualize. But like I also mentioned last week, that you also want to experiment with what you're doing, right? So I'm giving you bits and pieces of information every other week, right? And so it's your job to kind of use it, take from it, add to it, take away from it. Do what you need to do so it works for you. I think so far we've gone over, like 6 different methods or so? 6, right? 6 or 7 different methods. So no one method is correct. No one method is better than the other. I'm giving you all these so you can find what works for you best. Other than the visualizing and the reciting, the other thing that works for me is one of the 4 methods of breathing meditation that we went over months ago, where you are listening to the sound of the clock. So as it ticks, you're counting up and down. So there's a word for it, and I still can't find the actual mathematical word for it. But it's for every tick, you're counting 1, and then 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you go up until whatever number you want, and then you go backwards. So it's 10, 10, 9, 8, blah, blah, blah. For me, that's probably the most effective technique for me personally, because you're almost having to keep the concentration pretty focused. I usually go up to 30 and then go back down, right, from 30. So when you're doing 1, 2, 3, up until you get to like the mid-teens and the 20s, you're starting to lose focus of where you left off because you're having to repeat all over again, right? Especially when you go backwards, it can be difficult just remembering where you left off. Because there's a challenge there, because you have to keep focus, you have to concentrate, you have to stay focused on what you're doing. That for me is the most effective for me. The next most effective is chanting and the visualization with the reciting. So those are what works for me best. So when I do the counting, for instance, right, for me, when I count up to 30 and backwards, that's around 15-ish minutes or so. So that's also a form for me to know how long I've been meditating. So if I'm doing 2 sets, that's 30 minutes. If I'm doing 3 or 4 sets, it's an hour. So that's why I like that the best, because I can keep track of how long I've been meditating. Otherwise, if I'm doing something quick or in the morning, because I only meditate 30 minutes in the morning and an hour at night. So in the morning, I'm doing something that I know it's just going to take 30 minutes or whatever, right? But the point is just to experiment with different things, see what works for you best, because this is your personal practice, right? But I would recommend staying away from imaginary things or made up things. No monsters under the bed things. Any other questions?
You know, I ignored completely everything. So this is my first time. But from what I've been reading and trying to understand and feel, is to disengage my mind. So it's hard for me to count, or I've been trying just to disengage my mind. Try to observe my mind and see that no thought is coming up. And it takes me about, is that valid?
Well, when you're first beginning meditation, I would say probably in your first few years of practicing, we have this misconception that meditation is having no thoughts or clearing your mind. That's a misconception. It's not true. Especially for the first couple of years, because obviously it's impossible, right? You're always thinking. It's habit. We have thousands of thoughts throughout the day. So you can't just stop it when you tell it to stop, right? It's not that easy, obviously. So that's why we practice. But as was mentioned earlier, is when you do a practice, whether you're counting or you're saying a mantra or something, right? That is your meditation object. That is what you are focusing on for however long you're meditating for. And if you get distracted or you go outside that concentration, then that's your cue to say, hey, I'm thinking or I'm being distracted, and you come back. So the thinking part is not bad. It's bad if you don't recognize that you're thinking, you're being distracted, and you go on with this imaginary entertainment, right? But as long as you are able to be mindful and say, hey, I'm thinking or I'm being distracted, and you go back to your counting or back to your mantra, then that's an achievement. That's exactly what you want to do. So it's not bad to think. It's not bad to be distracted. It's bad if you don't recognize it. So, and that's one of the biggest things I hear from people is, I can't stop my mind. Well, you're not really trying to stop your mind. You're not trying to
stop it, then what's gonna
right.
misbehave?
Right. Like I say, it's like a child. The more you say no, 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 the more it wants what it wants, right? So it's better to instead of saying no or trying to stop it, it's better to just recognize it, observe it, and just let it go, right? So obviously, I don't know if y'all can hear the birds, but I can hear the birds chirping. So as I'm counting, after a while, you just ignore it. It just kind of becomes background noise and you don't really engage. But when you hear it, you always the easiest way to get rid of a thought is just to make a mental note of it, to give it a label. So if you hear a noise, if you hear a car or the dogs or the bird, you can just simply just say noise or bird or dog, right? You just want to acknowledge what's there, and it'll just automatically go on its own, and you go back to what you're focusing on. And same thing with any feeling. So if you're feeling pain or feeling discomfort, you just say pain, discomfort, or you're hungry, or you smell food, or you smell whatever, or you're feeling whatever, right? You're just giving things labels just to help yourself keep track of what your mind is doing, right? After a while, it does take lots of practice, you'll start to understand how your mind works. You can start seeing what certain situations cause you distraction, what kind of thoughts come into your mind as you're meditating, right? One of the types of meditation is contemplation. So part of that is you're basically just trying to use one object and being mindful of what thoughts come up, right? So if you have a persistent type of thought or type of feeling that comes up consistently, maybe that's an issue in your life that you need to focus on or need to address, right? So you can take that from what you've learned in your meditation and go out in the world and fix it. So don't try to push away the thoughts. Allow them to come in, acknowledge them, give them the labor, and then they'll just go away on their own.
We don't want that thought to lead into a story. Once we create a story, we're gone.
Right. Like I said, if you're doing the generosity meditation, you're visualizing stuff away, and all of a sudden, now in your backyard having barbecue and a pool party, you've lost your whole practice.
How important is it to, we talk a lot about loving kindness and compassion. How important is it to redirect that loving kindness to ourselves when we find that we've wandered? In other words, you use positive reinforcement rather than getting frustrated or criticizing yourself. Because once we criticize ourselves and say, I can't believe I'm distracted again.
Right.
That's a story itself.
Right. And that's why
gentle and loving with ourselves and just gently come back.
A couple of weeks ago when we did metta meditation or loving kindness meditation, right? When you're saying, when you're concentrating first and foremost on yourself first, right? May I be happy. May I be at peace. May I be healthy. May I be free from suffering. You always want to start with yourself, because yourself, all thoughts of emotions and biases and discriminations and all that starts from you, right? So you have to start there first. So like Liam mentioned, it's when you are being distracted, don't be discouraged. Don't say, I'm not doing this right. Because that's a lot of times that's the reason people give up on meditations, because they think they can't do it. But you can do it, but because you think you're thinking so much or you're being distracted so much, you think you're doing it wrong. And they don't know that's not wrong. And that's the problem. And that's why they give up, or they don't continue the practice. So when you are being distracted or the thoughts come up, but as long as you're being mindful and you're addressing it and you're letting it go, you're being compassionate to yourself. You're allowing yourself to allow these distractions to happen, because they're not bad as long as you don't entertain them and have the story, right? It's always an accomplishment. So you can end your meditation session and be like, you know what, I was distracted 50,000 times. Good for me. Because you've counted 50,000 times that you're distracted. That's an accomplishment. Any other questions?
I started out doing the visualization on generosity, but I found myself rummaging around in my mind for the possessions that are most valuable to me, and kind of what it would mean if I just gave them up. Are you supposed to get that deep thought into it, or just kind of visualize the image or the action of you just giving away your thing?
I would typically, you can do that. That's a good practice to do. it's usually better to, well, I would typically do it at the end. So after you've given everything away, and you can kind of go back and be like, what does that feel like? What does that mean to me, right? Or you can do it after every possession or item that you give away. But that is the point, right? You're supposed to ask yourself, how am I feeling when I give this away? Why do I feel this way, right? What makes this so important that I feel like I'm losing a part of me if I give it away? So it is good to go that deep, right? That's part of contemplation. You have to figure out, the whole point of contemplation is to find the core reasoning of whatever issue you contemplate on. So in this case, why do I feel such and such when I give this up, or why why does this make me feel a certain way, right? So it's very good because you want to get to those questions, to those answers. Because sometimes the answers are really mundane and superficial and really just dumb, right? And when you are able to reach that and think maybe it's pretty funny how you feel so attached to something that's a piece of paper or an eraser or something, right? You're seeing, yeah, or a box, and you're seeing just how unimportant it is really in life, right? But we just have this attachment to it for some reason, right? Whether it's because we've had our whole lives or someone special gave it to us or whatever it may be, right? But it's a very good thing to do, is you do want to figure out how and why you're feeling. That way, if it does have to happen, or something does happen to the item and it disappears or gets lost or broken, it helps you kind of in advance not feel so attached and not feel so much suffering over it.
We had an interesting thing happen once. We moved from a larger house to a smaller house, and put maybe 25% of our worldly possessions into a storage unit. 6 months later, I couldn't remember what was in there. And I asked my wife, have you missed anything? Have you needed anything out in the storage room since we locked it up and walked away?
Right.
Well, no. Maybe we don't need that stuff. Well, of course we do. Of course we do. So there you are. There's your clinging and your possessiveness, and it's like, that makes no sense. If I can't even remember the objects that are in there, how can I be attached to them?
Exactly.
But you're attached to the idea of having that room full of objects.
Right.
So it's like a mega clinging.
Exactly. And it was I won't lie, it was difficult for me to give up all my stuff, right? When you become a monk, you're basically just coming with a suitcase full of clothes and books and stuff, right? So I lived in a pretty big house. I had a decent life, so I had a lot of stuff and pretty shiny things, right? So I had to give all that up, right? So I had at least, I think, like 3 yard and garage sales. And I slowly saw my things just disappear, and people started taking them and buying them, right? But as I'm going through the 3 rooms that have stuff in it, I'm like, first of all, I'm never upstairs in these rooms that have all these things that I've been collecting. So kind of the same concept. It's there. It's locked away. You don't really use it or need it. Yeah.
That's your stuff.
That's my right.
What if you do? I'm not leaving that.
Exactly.
But that's the illusion, right? Because we don't possess that. Zero. Even when we
That's why we suffer, because we believe
it's just here, but that's not ours.
Even your body is not your
Part
own.
of this is a good thing here about impermanence. It's clinging. You can't have clinging. You can't cling to something that's not permanent. Right?
Even your body.
Your body.
Even your body's not permanent, right?
Even this world, our solar system, the universe, even.
That's meditation on death is one very important meditation for Buddhists, mostly for the monastics, for monks and nuns, but it helps, kind of like the same concept of the generosity, right? When you're giving away things, it helps you detach from those items. And when we meditate on death, you meditate on a loved one, a parent if they're still alive, or a kid, or someone you love, right? You essentially meditate on them dying. It's a very sad meditation. I've cried multiple times during those sessions because it's very sad to imagine someone you love dearly just disappear, right, or pass away. But at the same time, like the giving away of things, it helps you detach from the suffering that the death causes. Not so much from the person, but from the suffering it causes. So when the death does occur, you don't feel as burdened about it. You don't feel as like just what you would typically go happen or feel like when someone dies, right? It kind of helps you in advance prepare for death in a way. That's why typically during a Buddhist funeral, the MC or like the monks and nuns will, what's the word I'm looking for? Will not encourage, but essentially tell the family and friends to don't mourn, don't cry, right?
The teachers say that at funerals.
Yeah, don't cry over them because if you, depending on what you believe in, right? So if you believe like their spirit's still around, if the spirit or the person sees you crying and mourning, then they don't want to move on, right? Or they don't want to pass over. So instead we pray and we chant for ourselves. Typically during a funeral we chant the Amitabha Sutra, and it's not so much for the person that's dead, it's really for the family and friends that are there, because it helps remind them that life is impermanent, but life is also beautiful and pretty, and it can be, such and such a way. But it is a very powerful practice that I would encourage you try if you're able to. But it has pretty much the same concept as the giving away of items. Mm-hmm.
I think I've inadvertently done that recently with my dog a lot, and I keep stalking it. And I never thought about focusing on it, so when she does pass, I'm not as
Yeah.
I really like
dog, but she's been here. She's 15 years old.
Oh wow.
She's stumbling around a little bit now, and it's getting.
Yeah, I had to give my dogs to family when I came here, and I was like, these are my children. But one of them, he's, how old is he now? Like 9 or 10. He's a mid-sized dog, so luckily, I'm sure he'll live a very long time. But I've always but I've had dreams of him like at the veterinary, right? Like just dying on the table, waiting for someone to put the shot in. And I remember waking up from that dream like, oh my God, did that already happen? Did that happen? Where am I? What's happening? Right? Like you're just so crazy. But it is help because your dog is essentially like a member of the family, right? And they feel and they know how you feel and they know when you're sad and want to comfort you. So I always tell myself if I have to go and watch my dog basically die, I don't want to be there crying because then he's going to try to comfort me as I'm crying, but instead encourage him and tell him it's okay and and whatnot. So I'm not looking forward to that day because my family are going to call me and be like, hey, come do some dog prayers for your dog. And I'll be there crying as I'm chanting for him, As sad as that is.
So I want to share that I come from a spiritual practice where we observe our minds, and I'm moving here because I moved from that area from another state, very close to Buddhism. But one of the things that we used to practice was to understand what the things that we are attached to give us that we cannot give ourselves, that we don't find in ourselves, because we are essentially complete. Like concrete as we are, but we want to leave our minds that we don't have those things, and that's where you see people that drive for dogs while people is dying downtown, right, for cold or for starvation or things like that. And you're insensitive to the human thing, but you are sensitive to your dog. But it's because you are attached to your dog. That's giving you something you're not giving yourself. So just wanted to share that because the thing to meditate and understand is even a little.
Yeah, that's a big topic, because we always, when we are talking about impermanence or suffering, or just in life in general, we assume that things and people make us happy, that we need a wife or a husband, we need children, we need a big house, we need a nice fancy car to be happy. But what happens when those things disappear? Then you are unhappy, and then you have to reset the whole process again. So it's just a continuous cycle of happy, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad. But really, if you as you mentioned, like, just look deeply and acknowledge that these are just things, that we don't necessarily need them. Yes, we need a house, right? We need a roof over our heads and shelter and food and stuff to live life. But I've seen like interviews or documentaries about homeless people, and some of them are way happier than some of the richest people in the world, because their little possession or no possession of things just gives them complete freedom, right? And that's what we want to try to aspire in life. Maybe not so much be homeless or be in that such a cruel situation, but be able to live minimally, and be happy and observant with what you have, and knowing what is enough to survive and be happy.
Middle way, right?
Our middle way, exactly.
Leave without, so we can live with it.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, we need a structure, someplace to keep warm and dry, so we don't get sick and die. But we don't necessarily need a mansion, right? So how much is enough? Do you live in a little cardboard shanty, or do you live in a big mansion? Or somewhere in between that makes sense is reasonable for me. So I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about Buddhism, is that concept of the middle way.
And that's something I've learned after becoming a monk, right? I had this huge house full of things, and now all I have is a small room, one dresser, and a bookshelf. And I'm just as happy as I was living in a giant house. So I didn't need a 75-inch TV to live life, right?
What was that in that storage room?
Right.
We just need to get rid of the boxes.
Exactly. See, I use the boxes eventually. I use the
Keep your
boxes.
I don't think it was much room.
Yeah. All right. Any last comments? Okay. So we will chant our closing ceremony here. And again, we've completed our topics for our first part or first series. So the next two classes next month will be, as I mentioned earlier, just open discussions, and we'll review past topics and methods that we've gone over. And then we'll only meet once in April for our retreat. I don't know when exactly. It'll be sometime in April. And then we'll start again back up with deeper topics, maybe, in May. Okay. And now I'm